for the audience, what do you think new people, Sanna, should know about proper socionics, the Model A socionics?
That's a whole new topic. And you just kind of start learning it. I don't know. You start from the basics. That's what you do.
What do you think, as someone new to it, what do you think, I mean, in terms of, you're not new to it, but in terms of for those people who are thinking of looking at socionics, which areas of it do you think work, and which other areas do you think are questionable?
Well, depending on how much of an info dump they're willing to accept at once, I usually either send people to the World Socionic Society introduction, or just straight to Wikisocion and tell them to read the Model A and functions and IMEs. That pretty much gets you started.
Yeah.
The World Socionic Society one is easier to digest because it's shorter and so forth.
My advice would be to, once you get into it a little bit, is look at some different sources about the definition of the functions, because, go on.
Yeah, I agree, but not when you're just starting. You have to start from someplace. Don't don't go to all the different websites all at once. I think those two sites are where it's easiest to get the basics down. And then you can expand.
Yeah, so I would start with the definitions on Wikisocion, because Jack's definitions are slightly different.
They do have some different terminology, but sooner or later you have to learn that terminology anyway. So I don't really consider it a problem.
So, for example, some people might get thrown off by, so on Wikisocion, it will talk about, say, an introverted type of information metabolism. And then if they go to WSS, they won't hear intratim. They'll be like integrator. What do they call the extroverts? Do you just call them extroverts, or?
I forget. Let me check. It's energizing and integrating.
Right. And see, the thing is with that, we looked at the Berens things yesterday. Integrator fits behind the scenes. Energizer fits get things going. But it doesn't really fit, say, those other two. And so that's the thing within that school of typology, where the integrator and energizer thing is not something that's in classical socionics. I think we can say Wikisocion is mainly it's classical socionics.
Wait, what are you saying? You're saying they don't fit the interaction styles?
Yeah, but I also think that it's a little bit. I also think that it's a little bit different from classical socionics.
Yes,
as well.
Yeah, it is. I do think they fit the interaction styles actually. The socionics, introvert, extrovert. It's kind of weird to begin with if you come from other systems or even just the popular terminology. Yeah, it's
just that bit about calling it the integrator. We have Jeff, and now we can talk about something more interesting. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. That's not interesting. God,
no, it is interesting somewhat. Jeff, you have something on in the background.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, that would be much appreciated. Yes. So yeah. So yeah, it's just my basic point is that the way he defines introverts as integrators makes it sound behind the scenes rather than chart the course.
I think it applies to both, to be honest.
Anyway, so the reason I pointed that out is that uh, if someone's new to socionics and they come across the difference in the terminology between integrator and intratim, and energizer and extratim.
Yeah, there is going to be some confusion regarding the terms regardless of where you start. Eventually, you have to get used to both this terminology as well as the Wikisocion terminology, and there is a lot of it. So I don't really see a problem no matter where you start, as long as you start somewhere, because pretty soon you're gonna have both of it anyway.
Yeah, I think Wikisocion is the best.
It is if you can handle a lot of information at once. If you can do that, then it's fine.
Yeah, I think if people look at the IMEs, they've at least got a point of reference to see how they're different or where the overlaps are with.
I actually think that the World Socionic Society IME definitions are by far the best. I like to send people there because they are, I think, better than the Wikisocion ones.
Why are they different?
I think they just put more thought into it, because Wikisocion is basically just a compilation of, they pull data from other websites and they put it there. Whereas somebody actually sat down and defined and wrote, intentionally wrote a description of each IME that's supposed to make sense.
Yep. My point here is that if somebody believes that sort of the definitions are metaphysical and they have to, and they're being sort of logically derived, why do different sites have different definitions?
Because not everybody is very good at describing stuff. I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong. It's just that the language it doesn't convey the message too well, in my opinion.
Right. What I'm trying to get at is the subjective nature of it, rather than it being an objective thing.
Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to define them as objectively as we can, so that we can have a system we can discuss with other people. If it's completely subjective, then we can't discuss it with anybody.
Yeah. Because one of the principles of classical socionics is that there are 8 definite kinds of information out there. And if people have different definitions, that can sort of lead to the conclusion that there aren't 8 different kinds of of information definitely out there, but it's an actual conception, not based on something that is real.
Wow, you just basically summed up what I've been trying to tell you for a year.
So you don't think it's
No, I think they are artificial lines, divisions that we draw in order to be able to discuss the psyche with each other. I don't think they are actual things. I think we can define them however we want, as long as the system works. It doesn't mean that that you can isolate them in the brain in those specific divisions.
Right. You see,
I think it's just symbolic.
Right. So,
and that's why I don't have a problem with multiple different systems.
Right.
They're just,
And I agree with you there. This is why I have certain problems with saying that logic is objective, and because what it is this approach, and certain people talk about it from a metaphysical point of view, where it's like, these things are definitely there. These are definite aspects of reality, rather than stressing, as we do, that they are useful abstractions. As you said, to have a language. And Carl Jung himself wrote that he said, I can give no a priori reason for why I have chosen these four, only that they have come from my experience. So thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition.
Yeah, which is fair.
It's just that when people say it's metaphysical and dress it up as metaphysics, where it's because metaphysics got debunked a long time ago in philosophy. Like people trying to get at like the transcendent truth. Right then.
I think we should try. We just shouldn't pretend that we are actually there.
Right.
That's a nice goal.
An interesting point of view, because I was able to read a little bit of the book by the guy that wrote the good, Kevin Dutton, who wrote The Good Psychopath, and he was talking about persuasion, and this is something that more the proper psychologist would do. And he talked about, in order to write his SPICE technique of persuasion, he said he looked at 200 examples of persuasion, and he did factor analysis to see what the commonalities were between those 200 examples of good persuasion. And he sort of got these sort of 5 principles. And that's quite different from doing it based on a premise. I suppose that's a similar thing of like a more scientific approach. No, there's no questions yet when there should be, because usually they end up popping up because people take a while to see the live stream. We've got Jeff here in the background watching something. Jeff, you could talk about, if you switch your background, if you're not watching anything important, you could talk about what plans you've got upcoming on your channel. Because he's recently come back. Before he turns his mic on, if he does, I'll say what Jeff's current plan is. So he's got these themed days at the moment. I don't know what Monday is, but I think Tuesday is Typology Tuesday. Wednesday is Wild Wednesday. Thursday, I think, is Ask Jeff. And Friday is Fitness Day. And he recently did a video on how he gained the weight in the first place. And then, what did he say the next one's going to be on? Oh, the diets he tried in the past before hitting on his successful diet. There's 3 things in the private chat. I'll be back soon. Oh, right, okay. Right. When was that one? It would be nice if there was a timestamp in the private chat. That's one feature I'd like them to have. And Jeff has done a lot of videos. He's got a lot of videos in reserve so that he can upload them regularly. And I don't know whether he's going to have maybe guests on or do live Q&As in future. The problem is this one is That's why I like to have some guests in that. Whilst we're waiting for the questions to come in, we can at least have a bit of a chat. So your overall approach, Sanna, is that the types are it's a convenient way of forming the types rather than the types actually existing.
Sorry, can you ask again?
Yeah, so I think your approach is that, do you think the types actually exist, or do you just think it's a good way to organize a conception of the types?
I think people definitely have different personalities. The type is a chosen framework that we put on the person and choose to view the personality through that filter. It doesn't mean that there is nothing outside that type or that everybody of that same type is the same. So in that sense, no, I don't think it's like an ultimate fundamental thing, but the personality is. So the filters we use to discuss the personality changes.
Hmm. And I think that however we define the functions, the things that we put in those functional categories are real.
Define real. I mean, to me, it's real enough if we decide that this is the framework we're using, and
right.
It seems to work in the sense of we can find people that match that kind of framework.
So what I'm sort of getting at is, in choosing what we put in the functional buckets, I think I'll say bins, otherwise Jeff will say that bucket is not the same as book it. In the functional bins, where the definitions that you use should be useful. Not like these things where it's people who like this color or that color, or if they do certain things where it's like that's not important, but differences that make the difference. Now that time you said bucket. Okay, bucket. Oh, did I say it wrong then? I'll just say bin. In the functional bins, in the functional boxes. So, for example, one of the ways Dario defines the functions, especially in 8 Keys to Self-Leadership, the context of that book is the 8 Keys to Self-Leadership. So his definitions of the functions are going to be slanted towards things that can be improved. So the way he defines, so it's like, well, people have to use these things in order to have self-leadership. Therefore, there's going to be a TE spin on all of the definitions in here. And so we've got immersing in the present context. And so Jeff is back. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Hi. So you talked a little bit about it on your channel, the purpose of typology. And I think you said communication, didn't you? And understanding yourself and others. Mm-hmm. One of the problems I have with typology is, and I agree with you, it's like the people in the groups, like a lot of these Facebook groups, they're not really talking about typology. They're just using it as a sort of shorthand to be immature. It's like,
well, that's not just
Yeah, well,
typology.
it seems to vary. It varies by the group because when I was kind of finding places to post links to my videos, I noticed that some of the, group MBTI groups they really don't even talk about personality stuff. They're just kind of general sort of
yeah,
people post whatever groups. And then the ones that are, it seems to be one way or the other. Either they don't seem to talk about it at all, or they're really like stringent about like, only this type of stuff is tolerated, and there's all drama and people being banned and all things like that. It's like, it seems to go one way or the other. But I don't know. I'm trying to pick my spots, I guess. I'm not posting all of my videos in every group because I feel like they might not necessarily be deemed irrelevant. Like at least one of the groups I'm posting in has it where every thread has to be approved by an administrator. So,
yeah, and you can get in trouble. I mean, now I think I used to be able to post, it's like in 100 groups before I'd get in. Now it's like, and if you just go a little bit too quickly, just even after like say 10, you can get picked up, and it will say things like, "Oh, you have been reported as spam" or something like that. And now I just post in like 3 or 4 of like either the most popular groups, like those that have got like 25,000 members or something, or those groups that are something like INTP over 30 or IN something 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 over 30, because it's like,
yeah. Well, the first video I did, that you helped me with, like when I posted that, I put it in like quite a few groups, but then I sort of saw if I got any kind of response, and I didn't bother to keep posting in groups where there was like nobody was even seeing it, much less commenting. So, and I posted the ones later in the week, and the ones that I actually did get a little bit of response from.
in terms of the good ones out there, I'll say, besides my own, the Kersey temperament theory one is a good one, but do only mention Kersey temperament theory, folks, or you will earn the wrath of Gudrun Phoenix.
Well, she likes me, so I think I can get away with posting some things that maybe other people wouldn't. But because like the one I did today didn't have anything to do directly with Kersey stuff. But
yeah, I've noticed some people in there
she
do that. So it's like some. Anyway, so that is a good group, and it's a great group if you're an INTP and scientifically minded, because David Mark Kersey will post science stuff in there. And then the another serious group is called INTP Scientifically Minded. So, Jeff?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we have to. And there's something he asked me to do, and I forgot. Yeah. So,
was it the voiceover thing or something else?
Yeah, he asked me to on how big the files were of the recording I did of Please Understand Me Too, and
yeah,
and I keep forgetting because it's on an external drive that's on my old iMac. So I tried bringing it to my work computer, and it wouldn't even recognize the drive. So anyway, I'm gonna go check that real quick, but I'll be right back.
Yeah,
so
okay.
I'm still here.
Right, okay. So behind the scenes stuff, folks. So if he uses WeTransfer, there's a file size limit of 2 gigabytes.
Kind of computer's not even on since the last time the power went out, so I got to turn it on.
Okay.
But I don't want to forget to do that. He asked me that actually before I went out of town, and I forgot to do it, to check back on it.
So, Jeff, do you know any names of good Facebook groups where it's not?
Yeah, there's one called the SP Spaz. I've heard great things. It's
Okay.
the best one.
It's like it's the groups where it's like there's good typology, there's fun, but there's no one being a douche.
It's too bad because like some of the ones I like the best just sort of died out.
Yeah.
The NF Geeks group, one of them, we had a lot of fun in that group, and then there's the one that's Myers-Briggs Coffee House, and that's one of those that used to have a whole lot of good discussion, and then it seemed to devolve into only a few people really active, and those people were always kind of bickering or just, I don't know, it just seemed like it lost its momentum for some reason. I don't know why that happens with Facebook groups. It seems like some of them, there's a certain shelf life, and then they just sort of just stop being good. I don't know why. But.
Yeah, and there's so many groups.
I mean, the one, honestly, right now, I mean, the one I'm most active in is the alternate day fasting group, because that's the lifestyle I'm starting now. This is my first week of doing that, and so I've been mostly corresponding with the people in there, and most of my YouTube viewing has been about that also. So yeah, that's kind of taken most of my time that I wasn't working on my own videos.
I mean, the last time I didn't eat something for a whole day was late last year, when I thought I was diabetic. And I thought I was having it was just really, really bad heartburn from the from soda pop, from the
well,
iron
as far as like not eating anything from like waking up in the morning to going to sleep at night, the last time I did that was about the end of June. I did a 3-day fast back then.
Bloody hell.
What I'm doing now, I don't actually go like, I do go around 24 hours, but it's like afternoon to afternoon, if you know what I mean. So it's like, for instance, this week, yesterday, just to use like one example, I had coffee in the morning, and then I had a Subway sandwich for lunch, a little after noon, and then I didn't have any more calories the rest of the day until this morning. So it was less. To this time, it was less than 24 hours. It was more like 20 hours, I guess.
I mean, we hear some of the things that we hear, like maybe parents say things like this: or if you don't eat breakfast in the morning, you won't have the energy at lunchtime, and you won't be able to think properly. These sort of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are some people, that's true. That's the thing. The number one thing that I always say to anybody talking about like nutrition and health and stuff is that we're all human beings, so we all have some similarities, but everybody's different. Like each individual doesn't, they process things slightly differently.
Yeah.
When we talk about personality types, obviously we are talking about patterns, but we're not talking about, there's only these 16 robot types that everybody just does exactly the same program. So it's the same thing with physical stuff and diet and exercise and health and all that. No two people are exactly alike in the way that they do things. So, I mean, there are people that physically do need to eat something in the morning. Otherwise, they feel sick or, other negative things happen. And then there's other people who can be perfectly fine, going the whole day or, a part of the day without eating, so.
It'd be interesting if there's like a type pattern thing with that, where are the ESFPs and ESTPs better able to ignore their bodily needs and say fast rather than say ISFJ, ISTJ?
Well, the thing, way before I heard anything about, fasting as like a lifestyle type of thing, I'm pretty sure I talked to you about it before, that when I was really into things like the Ventrilo chat, where, you know, I was doing like voice chats where with people from the Typology Central forum and stuff, there were times where regularly I'd be in the chat till like wee hours of the morning, go hours and hours, you know, where I was hungry, thirsty, need to pee, you know, and I just ignored all that because it was
Interesting.
I was wrapped up in chatting with people. It was giving me so much energy from, you know, that was, you know, one of those times where, like, if somebody had been observing that, you know, and said, you know, how's this guy think he's really an introvert? He can, you know, because it's so obvious he's getting his energy from interacting with people all the time, you know. But anyway, but I still thought of myself as an introvert back then. But anyway, you know, it really didn't. It was sort of like when it was done, you know, when it was finally like time where, whatever reason, you know, the chat was wrapping up. Then it was suddenly I would realize, you know, I'm hungry, thirsty, got to go to the bathroom, super sleepy, you know, all those things that my body had just set aside because I was, you know, living off the rush, you know, like Pimbleton in the box.
Yeah. It's interesting because part of the socionics theory is that ESTP, ESFP, the extroverted artisans, can sort of ignore their bodily needs. And I'm just wondering if you'd observed that, like, the Guardians, because you said, like, they will tell you about their medical problems. So that's an aspect of their bodily needs. Do you think they are having the problem fasting? Like, they'll talk about stuff.
Yeah, obviously, I can't know to what extent. I know it's still up to the individual, but I mean, I would say just from my observation, in some cases they're exactly the opposite. The Guardians will almost be like the ones prone to be like hypochondriac in terms of, you know, saying something is always bothering them, whether it really is physically causing a problem or not. So they can get like really stressed out, which adds to the physical problem. So it's a sort of like the physical problem is created from the worrying about the problem that may not even exist yet. I've seen this happen many times. So, and obviously it's impossible for you to know how much is really like, you know, a physical ailment and how much is sort of a mental thing that sort of induces the physical ailment. But anyway, yeah, it seems like, and that's not to say that, you know, artisans can't do the same thing in some ways. And I experienced that this past week when I, you know, went 4 days without my medication because the doctor was unavailable to approve my refill.
Ooh, that's a bit.
So when I have a situation like that where the medication is something that helps, you know, lower my blood pressure and heart rate, is that when I start to feel the physical effects of not taking that, then mentally I'm aware of that. So it stresses me. And then, you know, thinking about it, you know, brain to heart, whatever makes it feel worse, you know, so it's it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy of, you know, the blood pressure is affected by worrying about the blood pressure.
Yeah, so that, like, they could give you, say, a placebo, and if you thought it was the heart tablet, you'd
I
mean, if you still had the 80 pounds that you had a few years ago, I think you'd need that heart tablet more.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt about that. Like because by the last day, because I ended up getting it about 4:30 in the afternoon that Wednesday, and by that day at work, I was pretty ill feeling, and that was the point at which I was saying I'm really glad that my overall health is as improved as it is, because I probably would have had a much worse reaction if I'd had to deal with that, you know, before that was the case. So yeah, it was already. I mean, I still feel kind of rough from it, even a couple of days later. I mean, it's Friday now, and you know, I still do feel it today. I did feel kind of odd, but you know, I'm not like deathly ill or anything. I'm just like, I'm not quite recovered from it. I'll just say that.
So isn't it interesting, Sanna, like the things that Jeff's been talking about there are consistent with the socionics definition of SI? with the bodily
Sorry,
needs.
I missed some of it.
Yeah, it was interesting though what he was saying about the guardians and then him ignoring those comfort sensing needs, isn't it? So there are the overlaps there.
Yeah, sure.
So we can say that comfort sensing is a thing for the guardians.
Maybe.
Well, I mean, as Jeff has pointed out, I mean, like he did come up with that line. They will tell you about their medical problems, and they have that attention towards their bodily needs, and it especially comes out in, I mean, the Kersey ISFJ profile, the protector, very much has a health focus, especially the health of other people. And there's a character in Homicide: Life on the Street. Jeff would say that, I think he said about Bayliss that, giving it away, but no one watches it anyway. Who watches this channel? Not many. It's like only an ISFJ would look after their elderly child abuser.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say only, but it does seem like the most likely. And I've known people in real life who, have told me stories about how badly their parents treated them as a child, and they still feel obligations to like help them in ways. And, if I'd been treated that way, well, I mean, I told you some of the ways my father treated me, which some of the stories I've heard from some of these guardians were worse than that. And I wouldn't, go, if my father came to me the way that their parents had done, like had a coworker that was ISFJ who had a mother, probably ESTP, sounded like from what she told me about her, and her mother had been a drug addict and given through all kinds of hell growing up, and now would still come to her for money. All these years later, she was like in her 50s or whatever, and would like come and ask for money, and she would give it to her, and I'm just like, if I'd had her for a mother, I would not only not want to be around her, but I would definitely not give her money.
Yeah.
So there's a different kind of thing, there.
Right. Right. So Jeff, could you give us a little preview of the videos that you've got upcoming? Say your typology videos.
Well, I think I told you before a little bit, but the coming up next Tuesday, I've got I believe that's the one that I titled "What the Myers-Briggs Letters Actually Mean," something like that, or it might have been "Type is Not the Reason." I can't remember which one I did first, but whichever one I recorded first, that'll be the next one.
Right. So what do you think they mean? Is that just a little preview?
I can't spoil everything, but I mean, basically, it's the concept is that people overcomplicate things and try to read a bunch of stuff in there that's not observable or provable. That if you boil it down to the basics of what the preferences actually are, that's what that is about, and that the more that you add on to it, the more is speculation without really any evidence. So, it works much better if you simplify things and talk about the people try to, I think because so many, intuitive types are into it, and they want to, they always want there to be like a deeper meaning They don't want to settle for the simple version of anything. So they kind of ignore what's on the surface. But a lot of times, even the surface level stuff can be actually the most helpful in dealing with people. And the more that you complicate, the average person that you encounter, is not going to, and no offense, Ben, but is not going to watch the videos that you put up with, with all the symbols and shorthand and stuff in the titles. Like they don't know what that means, and they're not going to really likely try to find out.
Well, what I would try and do is show them the best fit type videos that we've been doing, where it's like temperament and interaction style.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see that because I think I'm pretty sure I linked you a long time ago to a video that I saw that was actually somebody doing like a brief sort of seminar thing about how an MBTI counselor, like what process they go through when they're like trying to help someone figure out their best fit type. And it was really interesting because, she basically said that going into like Jungian functions and stuff was like one of the last things that they would do. It wasn't not nearly anywhere near the first thing they would go over because most people are confused by that. So.
Yeah. I'll just ask this quick question. How does an INTP, well, maybe you don't want to take that route. Oh, okay, I've got something for you. Go to events where you think you're going to meet other INTPs there, like, say, a science museum or something like that, or events where you think you're going to find INTPs and people with similar interests. And then it's something like, I think that Jeff, you mentioned that the feeling type is more likely to get to know the person and learn something, whereas the thinking type is more likely to talk about something, a subject, and then get to know the person in the process of that. Now, did you do that just for ESTP and ESFP, or did you think it was for all feeling type, most feeling types versus thinking types?
Well, I mean, I was specifically, the conversation I had was with DJR&D, so it was mainly about the difference between STP, SFP, I guess, in approaching that. But I would say that in more general terms, that feeling types tend to just be more person-oriented in general, in terms of human relationships are like higher up the priority list. And again, that's just a general thing. It doesn't mean that thinking types are not interested in people. Obviously they are, but it just means that it's, when we talked about the difference between like cooperator and utilitarian, it doesn't mean that utilitarians are not interested, or don't have a moral compass or values, and it doesn't mean that cooperators don't want to do things efficiently or, in ways that work. It just means they have sort of an order, what occurs to them first or what's more important to them. So it's the same thing with that, is that, an F type is usually going to prioritize human relationships a little bit more. But again, it's just a generality. I know that, again, by the individual, that's not always going to be true.
I think what I have done is that if they do get into an emotional situation with someone, say someone's upset, or they tell them something, they ask for advice, and if in a psychological area, the INTP think, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. So maybe that's why I'm sort of looking at these things like CBT, or like little things like that sort of fit the way an INTP might help with, say, advice, sort of counseling advice, is they go with that approach rather than trying to be an INFJ, do it in an INTP kind of way of like, well, if you look at it like this, that kind of thing, because in that area, it's like, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to, like, they empathize. It's like, what do they say to the person to say console them, or should they even try that? So maybe because of that weakness, INTPs tend not to want to go into that area, and will keep it to talking about abstractions rather than personal things. Did you notice that with your brother, Jeff? I think you said like he had a wall of stuff that he wouldn't talk about.
I'm not sure what you're talking about now.
Okay. Your older brother, the INTP brother.
Okay, what about it?
Is there like a wall of stuff, like stuff that he's very private about? Where it's like, I think you once said, hey, I'm not going to talk about that kind of, or gave you a look. There's a bit of a...
I mean, not specifically. I mean, there's things that he just doesn't ever really bring up much, but I don't recall any particular thing like that. I'm just not somebody who tends to ask.
Right. Well, good.
I mean, I let people share with me what they want to share with me, and I don't tend to pry with people very much.
Yeah, it's one of the things I like about you. And I think it's like an Enneagram 5 thing. It's like they like INTJ, INTP. It's like they're not comfortable in that area.
I don't know how on this old Mac system. I don't know how. I found where I've got the Please Understand Me audio files, but they're in 12 disk folders. Right. I don't know how to select where to see the total space for all of them.
Jeff, are you able to put your webcam back on, or does it go off when you go onto a different page?
In a second I can, but
okay.
I move across the room, so I wasn't even on camera.
Okay. All right.
I was just trying to figure this out because he asked me how big it was, and I don't know how to find out that exactly.
Well, what you could do is you could try to send it over WeTransfer, say to me, and it might say, "Oh, this file is too big."
Well, I mean, I can tell you, track 1 is 45.5 meg.
Oh, that's fine. That's easy. That is easy to send.
And that's just like, I mean, but that's
okay.
One track. There's 12 discs, and like most of the discs have like much more than that in them. So
yeah, but you can at least, the fact that you've got separate tracks and that you've not got a file that's like 2 gigabytes, what is it, 2048 megabytes, means that it is possible to send them over. You might have to send them over in batches, but it is possible to send them.
Well, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how big the total is, and I just don't know how to do that on this old system, because like on work computer on Windows 10, I know how to just select the whole thing.
Maybe if you do try WeTransfer, it's like as you add files, it says, "Oh, you have this much left," that kind of thing.
Well, okay, I think I know what I can do, because I can move this. Can move this thing that says unknown album out of that folder, and then I can get the info on that bigger folder, and then it'll only be the Please Understand Me files.
Right. I'm trying to remember back to when I used the Mac about 13 years ago.
Yeah, well, even that. I mean, I've used MacBooks more recently, but there are several operating systems beyond this one. This is 10.5, maybe? I can't remember now. It's the one they called Snow Leopard.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a while ago.
Technically, this computer is not even supposed to be able to run it because it's not supposed to have memory, but I put it on it anyway, so it could die any minute. I never know when I don't use it.
I remember you said that you had an upgrade that you didn't actually want to have, but it sort of snuck in there.
Well, what happened was basically the computer crashed, and I had to restore it, and I could the in-between OS was not available anymore. So the original one I had when I first got the computer was, but the upgrade I had done, the in-between one, the Leopard one, it wouldn't work. Right. There was no way to get it, or it wasn't accessible. So I had to go straight to the Snow Leopard one because I had a disk for that. and the memory requirement it had for it was actually more than the memory this computer has. But it worked anyway.
Right. Well, that should be all right then, Vero.
Okay,
It's,
so
I mean, this is going to be a thing for INTP. Is like meeting people with common interests. That is always a tricky thing, especially if you live in, like, say, a minor city, because the bigger the cities, the bigger the city, the more likely there is for them to be enough people for a niche interest. So, for example, in London, it's got a large enough population to have, like, MBTI meetup groups or things like that, or even a socionics society. So, I mean, a lot of things, it's like Jeff did a very interesting video. It's not just like about ESFP, what is it, preference versus reality? About how Jeff's preference would be ideally to be like the ESFP in the description, but the lack of opportunity was getting in the way of being able to express himself that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of environmental factors that affect what actually happens in your life, and a lot of type profiles, don't really take that into account. So they tend to focus on, this is the type of person who you see doing blah blah blah, and it's like, okay, that can sometimes be true, but there's plenty of people doing other things that you don't see the same way. As I've said before, like with the whole introvert extrovert stereotypes, like if everybody acted like the stereotypes of introvert and extrovert, it would maybe be like 20% of people that really existed, because there's probably like 10% of the introverts that are really like these hermit types that don't want to interact with people ever. And there's probably 10% of extroverts that are the ones that are always super outgoing and always at parties and always like have lots of friends around them all the time and all this stuff. These are like descriptions of sort of the extreme version of those things and not the everyday average version.
Yeah, it's one of these things that is where you could do a whole event on breaking down even just the social aspects of extroversion, where a type like ESTP is likely to have a lot of contacts when they're older in some of the events that they do, but not have like the deep relationships. And then I think ESFP, I think they want those deep relationships a bit more than ESTP. What do you think of that, Jeff?
Wants deep relationships?
Yeah. Do you think ESFPs want deeper relationships than ESTPs?
I guess it depends on what your definition of deeper is.
Well, ESTPs tend to have a problem with their feels. It's like, I think it's difficult for them to be open up and be vulnerable to someone in order to get that close distance or to show that side of them. Especially when they're younger.
You mean in terms of just being like transparent about their feelings?
Yeah, but also, yeah, a little bit, but it's almost like it's like what they want from the relationships, I think, would be different. Like, I would think on a surface level, the younger ESTP is like they want people either useful to them or are fun, good company. That I wouldn't think that they're looking for the kind of connection that, say, NFs look for, where they're looking for that soulmate thing. But I think that the SFPs do have a bit of that, where they're looking for that strong connection. That can be explained a little bit in terms of functions. But I'm sort of like looking at the whole pattern. So, for instance, I think with my father that he knows a load of people, but he doesn't seem to know them deeply. Right then. So yeah, you're in look, Jeff, with the 195. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm typing, telling David the length because he asked me a while back and I didn't respond. So 3 weeks ago. So
yep.
Sending that message to him in the group right now.
Yep. Well, I'm glad I sent him that message over Facebook now a few weeks ago. Hey, Jeff, still keen to do the thing.
What thing?
But the thing with the voiceovers for the Kersey books.
Oh, I didn't know you did send him a message. I mean, this came from somebody tagged me in a group.
Oh, right. Probably a different thing.
Yeah, actually, it was Goodrum who said that I would sound. Because somebody asked, Sabrina Sterling asked if the book, I guess it was. They were talking about a different book, and I don't remember which one, but asked if it was going to be on Audible, so, an audiobook version. And Goodrum said that I would sound fantastic on this, and I responded that I actually did record myself reading Please Understand Me Too a while back.
Well, if Goodrum thinks you're good for it, then you're almost there to closing the deal, Jeff. Given her influence. Right then. So, Sanna, what do you think of what you've been hearing?
I was kind of distracted.
Okay.
Give me the topic and I'll tell you.
He doesn't listen to me, Ben. You know that.
I do. Depends. I have a conversation going that got kind of heated, and I have been typing furiously. Sorry. So yeah, ask me a question and I'll answer.
Okay, what do you think of the social aspect of extroversion, introversion?
You mean in socionics?
Yeah, go on then.
Socionics specifically, because.
Yeah, okay. If you go, because that's the typology you know best. If you go with that.
Well, in socionics, it's like the extroverts are usually the ones that have the energy, so they can appear. They tend to initiate socially and otherwise. It's not quite the same thing as being socially extroverted, which is the usual way we define it, but they can overlap. So in socionics terms, it's usually extroverts that initiate things and the introverts that kind of jump in, afterwards. Obviously, it's not always that way, but that is the general socially visible effect. It looks suspicious.
What about for you?
For me, well,
Yeah.
For me, I'm just so introverted, and regardless of how you define it, I'm always introverted. So to me, it's very difficult to separate them. I definitely don't have energy. I'm not socially extroverted by any means. So in me, they just kind of all coincide. Was there something specific that you're trying to dig?
Yeah, I was trying to get at so how would you assess your social skills? Because I think one-to-one they're very good.
Yeah, I don't think that my social skills are like crap or anything. It's just that I don't have a lot of energy, and dealing with people takes energy.
Yeah.
Much less when it's online, but quite a lot when it's in real life, unless it's somebody that I know really well in our chemistry kind of work. Especially if they're also introverted, because then we can introvert together. So I don't think it has much to do necessarily with social skills. It's more about the energy level and socionics.
Right. Now think what it's like for the INTers, where they've got the same energy problem, but they've not quite got the same social skill as the INFs.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I have super awesome social skills, but if I do have the energy for whatever reason, then I definitely have the ability to track people's reactions.
Yeah. Especially
Yeah,
at close. Yeah. I was just saying at close. Yeah.
Sorry. No, I was just going to add that, yeah, I do prefer one-on-one interaction. It's a lot easier for me.
And that fits with your Enneagram, your instinctual stacking.
Yeah.
And it fits with the role variant of the counsellor that INFJ is predisposed to, and I would argue that IAI is as well. So it goes back to what we said before, that INTJ and INTP can have problems with close psychological distance. But if the more they understand themselves better, that can help with that. So I would say Enneagram, of all the typological systems, will help you most in those situations, because it's almost a system that can help you with counseling.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, because Sanna here sees it as based around core fears, and it sometimes it can be difficult to get to somebody's Enneagram type unless they're at closer range, and the more you get into it, tri-type becomes important, and sometimes you need quite a lengthy conversation to get to somebody's tri-type, because we frequently had events with Jonathan where through it he's changed his typing of the person as he's gone through, whereas say temperament is a bit more noticeable. So for example, people should see your NF-ness before your 4-ness. Back to Jeff. So
why should they see that though? I mean, most of the time, if you look at me and you don't talk to me, you probably don't see any of them.
Well, so for example, I mean, I think that the NF-ness is well, maybe it's just more noticeable for me. Anyhow, so Jeff, I think you've said before that temperament is the most noticeable thing in typology.
I mean, to me, it is. Yeah, I most of the time there are some people that other things will jump out at me first, but I mean, temperament it comes out usually is more obvious than anything else. But every once in a while, when someone just really has a certain quality, like we've talked about before, some TV characters one of the things we reviewed and stuff, where they just kind of come off as a particular archetype, where you're thinking more of that than necessarily just to the temperament. So, and that happens in real life too sometimes.
Yeah, it's spooky.
I think
isn't
I
it?
said with my mother that for the most part, Enneagram is probably like of the main things we've talked about, probably the one that the least occurs to me, just seeing people. But there are occasionally people or characters that suddenly I'll be like, that's what comes out the most, regardless of what their temperament or type is. And when I was thinking about my mother, there was when I just tried to come up with her type the first time, like 10, 11 years ago, I guessed ISFJ, before I really talked to her about it. And it was just because of some of her behavior that was very much trying to please her mother.
Yeah, ESTJ, yeah.
Who was definitely a guardian.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize, was that one of the reasons why she always seemed to fail at that or feel like she did was because she wasn't the same as her mother in terms of temperament. So there was always a disconnect. But when I read the description of the type 2 in Enneagram, I was like, this all sounds like my mother. So that was, sometimes you just read a description where a person that just seems like, oh, this really describes them well. In another like format, but overall, the most that I just see in a day-to-day basis is usually overall temperament.
Yeah, it has that.
And I guess the SN thing, often will be the first thing, but also sometimes it'll be the cooperator, utilitarian difference. But the concrete abstract, because it's so much in what people say, where when you're talking to an intuitive abstract type in a forum where they have an opportunity to like actually sort of express themselves, they're not locked down to a certain way of speaking, where you've got to stick to facts or whatever, when they're just kind of having casual conversations. It really usually doesn't take that long before the hypothetical questions start coming out. They start to try to steer the conversation back towards concepts rather than objects.
Guilty.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, the more you know somebody, the more it just becomes just naturally, how that person is. But when you're just sort of seeing somebody for the first time and observing and listening to what they say, if you let somebody express themselves and somebody is willing to for more than a couple of sentences, then it usually doesn't take that long for that stuff to start coming out. And because of my job, I'm around mostly guardians most of the time. It's a big contrast because of how concrete and factual they always are, always rehashing the same facts, telling the same stories, going through the same stuff, that when somebody comes in the office who's an abstract type, they stand out quite strongly in terms of the way they talk about things. It's a big contrast.
Yeah.
So when we have the occasional N-type manager, they definitely do not sound like the typical people that we have.
I think it would be
the NFP manager we used to have, when she would come in the office, it was like an event. Because it was like she blows into the office like a whirlwind and makes an impact on everybody in the room and then leaves, after a while. And it's like, she always was sort of this Hurricane Lacey, you know, we called her sometimes, in terms of she would just, you know, go from person to person and then like talk for a couple minutes and then get distracted by something else and go to the next person and then, you know, like that with everybody. And we have an ENTJ manager who, he enjoys having conversations with people that are willing to engage with him, have what he, you know, considers like an intellectual conversation about some topic or whatever. If it sticks to just the Guardian small talk stuff, he can do that, but you can tell he loses interest in it pretty fast. So it's like he's adapted to obviously being able to be in that kind of environment and has no problem talking to, you know, the Guardians and getting along on a regular basis with them. But you know, the more that the conversation is about politics, philosophy, you know, social type thing, and less just the factual stuff of work environment and that kind of thing, the more he's engaged and interested.
How political? What do you think about that with Guardians with politics? Do they like to talk about politics, or is it like this is obvious? This is what we.
Some do, some don't. Depends on the person.
Yeah.
I mean, my closest coworker, the one I talk to the most, as we work right next to each other, she doesn't like talking about politics.
Right.
And she's an ISTJ, but the other ISTJ in the office doesn't mind at all. He'll do it quite frequently. But his conversations in politics are very different, like than the ENTJ I was talking about, because in that they've actually had some conversations, and the ENTJ has said about the ISTJ, I enjoy talking to him because he's intelligent and expresses himself well as far as his views, and he's like the opposite of me on a lot of issues. So it's good to talk to someone who is an intelligent representation of the other side.
Right.
These are, you know, the words of the ENTJ saying this, that he enjoys having like debate kind of conversation with him because he's very solid in his views and is a, you know, intelligent person who's able to express his views that are in many ways opposed to the ENTJ's views. So,
yeah.
So he the way I, you know, interpret it is with when the ISTJ is talking is that he doesn't have a real doesn't have a lot of tolerance for listening to the opposing side very long. Like he pretty much is, as long as you're agreeing with him, he'll talk about it for a long time. But he doesn't want to get into a debate.
Yeah. Sanna, I think you said your friend Marcia was she trying to decide between two types, and then you came down on ENFP. What was the other type she was considering?
No, she's not considering anything. She doesn't really know socionics, so it's basically up to me to type her.
Right.
And she didn't argue my typing because she doesn't know. I mean, she's in whatever that MBTI practitioner thing is. She's done the training as well, so she can type herself that way, but not in socionics.
I think you said that you think your mother was ENFP. So, are there any questions you have? Yeah. Have you got any questions?
Kirsty ENFP probably. Yeah.
Right. Have you got any questions about ENFP that Jeff could put his pennyworth in, or his 2 cents in?
Probably, but I mean, you're putting me on a spot. I can't.
Okay. Jeff, what do you think?
He likes to do that.
Yeah, Jeff, what do you think people should know about ENFP that's not really in the profiles?
Oh gosh. People should know about ENFPs that's not really in the profiles.
Or that you've noticed that's not in the profiles.
Well, I guess the first thing that stands out is that they're not all like manic types. Often sort of the stereotype of ENFPs is kind of what I was saying earlier about Hurricane Lacey, is like there are ENFPs who do fit that stereotype, but they're not all like that. There are many that are calm and composed much of the time. So I guess that's what I would say, is that there's variation in that type, just like there is in any other type, in terms of the level of that kind of behavior. I mean, I would say probably every ENFP has things that they can get, very enthusiastic about, so they're going to come across more, I guess, more manic sometimes, but not like to an extreme degree necessarily always. And one of the people who taught me about that was Mike from NF Geeks, because he was an example of an ENFP that was, professorial a lot of the time in terms of his
literally
his demeanor.
Because that was his occupation.
Right.
The thing that surprised me was the ENFPs I know that run a business, and it sort of goes against the stereotype of them being a bit ditzy. Mm-hmm. And there's a weird thing in socionics where they can act like an ENTJ, and it's like, whoa, that's surprising. Where they can like be really effective in business, and it's almost have to go against the type.
This book right here.
Yeah, I've not got that one.
Talks about that very thing, because it talks about how anybody can fill any role. It's just some people are instinctually going to be more natural at doing certain roles, and so they're just going to have to work harder.
Yeah.
The more something is against their instincts, the harder they're going to have to work, or more they're going to have to practice to get good at those things that don't come easily to them.
Or find something in it that is that. So, for example, in a business that maybe an involvement with people, find that people aspect. Or
right, yeah. For instance, my former coworker and friend that's INFJ, she, the last job she had with the company was basically as an accountant, which people think of like being like an ISTJ type job, and our current person in that job is an ISTJ. But when we had an INFJ in that role, she did the professional, the work of accounting, but she took every opportunity she had to do the more personal aspects in the company. So one of the things that for a short time, she was doing training of managers in certain customer service things, and then for a while she was doing interviews of potential managers, and she got much more into that than she ever did with any of working with accounting software type stuff. That was just sort of the robotized things that she had to do, looking forward to the other stuff.
So who's going to be the 1,000th subscriber?
I don't know. It can't be me. I've been subscribed for a long time. It's back in your. I think I was in the back before you hit triple digits, if I remember right. Pretty sure I was one of your first 100.
I've actually started to notice people now who have got really good channels, who have got like 40 videos, like good videos, and like they've hardly got any subscribers. So it gives you now. There's so much competition out there now that they don't get to the surface. Now,
yeah, I said before that I'd rather have a small group of people that actually paid attention than like a million people that didn't. When there's channels that you see where they got like 300,000 subscribers, and if you look at the comments, they're not even commenting on the video. They're like arguing with each other about something else. Like they don't even seem to. And then some of them, there's hardly any comments on the video at all. And I was telling you about the anaerobics channel, where it's so dependent on what the subject of the video is, because he's got videos that are about a particular subject, that whatever reason that particular subject is trending or popular, where he's got a ton of views and comments for that video. And then another video he uploaded like 2 days later is like a tiny fraction of that, because the particular subject or title of that video just didn't have the same appeal as the other one did. So it either just didn't get shared on enough things, or just, whatever reason, just did not have the same effect. So there's some interesting patterns sometimes when it's not every channel is not always a consistent, it grows at exponentially and it's always after a certain time, this is the average that they get on everything. It varies tremendously depending on what it is. And I have to say that the video I posted, my first Wild Wednesday video, is the first video I've ever done where so far the dislikes are outnumbering the likes 3-1.
Yeah, I sort of misinterpreted
like,
that video.
Apparently, I got under some people's skin already.
You got a little bit under my skin because I thought you was like, oh, he uses the letters. Because so Sanna, you will like that video because Jeff was complaining about people misusing the MBTI letters.
Yeah, it's annoying.
People with their own system. So, and he didn't. He pointed it out.
I think it's easy to misinterpret. And I already had somebody that did in one of the Facebook groups because he said that I contradicted myself in the second part of the video because I was talking about not censoring people and not stifling discussion or dissent and things like that. And because I was talking about people that try to report and get people's YouTube channel shut down and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I said, no, it wasn't a contradiction because nowhere in the first part when I was talking about saying people shouldn't do this, did I say that those people should be banned or have their voices taken away. I'm appealing to those people directly. Don't use this, for your own agenda and misrepresent these things that have meanings. It was not me saying these people should be banned or And so I think it was a consistent viewpoint because the second part of the video I was talking about when people try to stifle what they disagree with or they label as hate speech or things like that, then they end up empowering the people that they're trying to fight to get stronger by virtue of sort of forming these kind of underground type movements based on being, reduced from the mainstream or whatever.
I mean, the socionic supremacists, the bigots that would go into the groups, and I was a little bit different. I was the way I would try to convert people over is I would do it as sort of this is like MBTI with extra stuff, whereas the people who were obnoxious about it, where it was that's rubbish, this is better, and you got to learn this complicated system. So they weren't winning many friends over in the way they were doing things. So I had that about the first year I was into, or year or two, that I was into this thing of actively trying to convert people over by sharing stuff around. But that was more of a thing of, hey, I like this thing and I'd like to talk to other people about it. And that was at a time. And so that was my thing. It's just, I was just thinking about the way you phrased it, the way I interpreted what you said was, oh, it relates to the dichotomies that they use in MBTI. And then I thought, well, what about Behrens and Kersey? They use the 4 letters on their website.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with Behrens as you are, but the thing with Kersey is that he started from a different point and then came to basically when he discovered Isabel Meyer's work, he realized how it correlated with the other stuff he already had learned.
Yeah.
And when he sort of put them together, he saw the same patterns and he just sort of divided them differently necessarily, didn't necessarily make the same groupings, but he felt it useful to say, this lines up with this. But he got some flack from the Myers-Briggs people for doing that, even though in many ways his book sort of popularized the Myers-Briggs system. So they sort of worked in tandem, but he took enough kind of flack for using that in his last couple of books he stopped using the Myers-Briggs letters, even though he still made mention of her in the book and said I believe these things line up with each other. But most of the books, the last few books, he used his own terms and didn't use the Myers-Briggs types because he didn't want I guess there to be confusion or people to confuse him saying those things.
I think there was even maybe a threat of maybe some legal action by the
and according and I think it was kind of regrettable because I guess according to his son Isabel Myers always had a good relationship with David Kersey, so he kind of regretted that when she was no longer with us, that some of the people who worked for Foundation later on were not as cooperative or whatever you want to call it.
So Linda Barron, she actually does type people based on temperament and interaction style, because I asked Dario, how does he type people for his EEG research? And he said temperament, interaction style, and then he sort of gives people time to sort of sit with the profiles to have they call it the self-discovery process.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I saw that he posted something, and I think it was like in the morning, so I was barely awake as I was seeing it, but Dario was posting stuff that was something about brain. I forgot what it was. It was something like the functions as brain maps or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, and I was curious about that, but I don't remember exactly where I saw it, because, like I said, I think I saw it in the morning when I was just waking up. So
yeah, I mean,
Facebook has this terrible system in terms of the way things appear, and then when you try to go back to them, you can't find them. It's like, where did this?
Also, when you have there's this thing where their
search function is terrible.
Yeah, they have the worst thing is when you have the comments and then the replies to the comments, they seem to get lost very easily. Or if you reply to someone's comment, it doesn't show up in the notification.
Yeah, the notifications don't make any sense. Like, sometimes I'll get notified of a reply to something I put, and then other times it won't. Yeah. And I'll see that there was a reply, but then there wasn't a notification for it. And then, I definitely do not like the way that the iPad app works, in terms of you can't, when you click on the thing to make a comment, you can't see the original post. So you have to keep exiting out of the comment thing to look back at the original post. In the desktop version, you can just look up and see it at the top of the thing. But in the iPad thing, it opens up this like dialogue box for the comments that covers the original thing. So you have to keep going out of it if you want to see the original, which I don't know who thought that was a good way to do it. But
they should test it. Have people actually test it, do market research on it to see how people can get it, and have people of various levels of competency test it out. Don't just give it to nerds working at Facebook who know it all inside out.
I'm not sure I understand your question, Retro Gamer 71. Consider the first two functions as the most consciously operable. Is it limited in this way?
I think he means the dominant and auxiliary.
Right, but what about them? I'm not sure I understand what the actual question is.
Does it mean they operate in reality?
Theory centered on Myers-Briggs?
Yeah. I think his one's...
I mean, are you asking if it's limited because, Myers-Briggs didn't talk about every function in every person or something like that? I mean, if that's the question, then no, I don't think that that's limited. I don't really like those so-called function models that say there's this definite order of functions and each one has this particular role that we know. I think all of that is just mostly raw speculation. I don't think there's much proof for any of that. They just had a fun time with that, like the John Beebe guy. Just a bunch of people just took his stuff, and I really don't agree with most of that stuff.
Yeah, I don't.
And every time I challenge somebody on that who subscribes to that, I have not found one person who can give me actual solid examples of these things. They just, when you ask them how do you know this, they always just say, well, that's what the theory says. I'm like, well, that doesn't show anything. I mean, I can make up any theory I want. I could say, my theory is that we're all bananas,
Yeah. The thing I don't like about the Beebe thing is he can't even go to the trouble of giving an exam of explaining how a function is supposed to be in all different positions. And I was told that at an event he would leave it to other people to discuss it. And I just think that's sheer. I just think that's laziness, and I'm always suspicious of ENTPs anyway.
Yeah, and as you know, Ben, I'm not a fan of that Drenth guy either. I think most of his stuff, at least, I know that a lot of intuitives seem to love the guy because they think he just is spot on with his intuitive descriptions, but his sensor descriptions are terrible.
I think you said that you thought he wrote them from his basement, but he did write a couple of really good articles on how, say, INTJ is a P and how INTP is a J in terms of the difference on the inside and the outside. So, for example, INTP, they organize their thoughts and their theories, but when it comes to the real world with the NE and the NP stuff, whereas INTJ, like, they organize their external world, but inside they've got that weird NI thing going on. So the difference between the internal and the external world. And I think when I did the MBTI step 1 with you, I've got to phrase this very carefully. You described me as a wannabe J.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I fully admit I've said that there are weaknesses in the MBTI itself, the assessment, because, and this is one of the things I said in that video. Here's another little teaser for you, Ben, that's coming up on Tuesday, is that the MBTI questions do not ask about cognitive functions at all. They ask about what do you do in certain situations. So they are behavioral questions. So for anyone to say that a certain result on the MBTI tells you that you use certain cognitive functions is just not true. It doesn't tell you that. Anything you can make certain, you can surmise certain things based on what people prioritize, but it's not. The questions are about what behavior you do in certain situations. They're about what, it's about preferences, but it's about your preferred behavior. It's not. It does not ask questions about, like, I mean, very little anyway, about what you actually think about something in terms of. It's questions about, like, what do you tend to do? And the Kersey temperament sorter is the same way. They're about tendencies more than they are about, brain things. I don't know about a better way to say that, but
has the Kersey temperament sorter moved away from those dichotomies and become more consistent with its own theory? Because I know he criticized those dichotomies at the back of Please Understand Me Too.
Yeah, I don't know, because I mean, I don't know when the last time that was updated, but I do know that the temperament sorter thing that we went over with some people, that's in the back of Brains and Careers and Personology. This, in Brains and Careers, they call it the Personality Finder. I think there was a different name in Personology. But anyway, that obviously focuses on determining somebody's temperament first.
Yeah.
And because believing that that's the most important thing. And so I would say that would be probably the best thing to start with, in the sense that if you narrow down someone's temperament, then you can kind of get more specific than that after you've established that. Because then you don't have people, when you have these type forums where somebody's like trying to type by functions, and they'll say, well, I've decided I'm either an INTP or an ESFJ. Like, I mean, in terms of daily life, those two types really don't appear much like each other at all. So it's kind of funny that you would have that, but it's because you're trying to do this on paper function thing instead of, what really is your basic mode of operation.
Yeah, that's the people who give quadras a bad name. They will say things like, ESTJs can look a lot like ENFPs because they're both extroverted delta types. And I've actually heard
they can both wear suits.
Yeah.
Well, so stop using MBTI terms then, Ben, when you're talking about quadras.
Well, I think quadra values are a hornet's nest when the person is not developed in a way, in a rounded out. So, for example, those ENFPs that I talked about, I'm back here. Those ENFPs I talked about in terms of like those that run a business, like I don't know, 3 or 4 of them. You can see, like, yeah, they've got that TE going on there, and these other things, right? Where those you can say, yeah, like TE like stuff. Yeah, so just then the stuff that you get in personal IG, I'm just going to quickly show these on camera. So my webcam is now behaving itself. So those, and because I remember when I first did this that I had problems. Oh, I didn't show that one. Did I do Brain Finder and? Oh, that's another one. Order form. Let's go. Okay, yeah, go back to this. Yeah, the dichotomy is, although there's a.
Anyway, the reason I brought up that thing about the flaws in the assessment itself is that there are people that will come up, will be the assessment will say they're a type that is wrong because of the way that certain questions are worded in terms of that. And just as I said that there are a lot of SP types who will come up as Ns on those kind of assessments because they make the NS questions sound like all creativity and any new methods of doing things or any of that is all an intuitive thing. And so sensing perceiving types are not going to look at questions that say, like, do you want to do things the old, tired, tried and true way, or do you want to do it a new and innovative way, and answer the old, tired, tried and true way? Like, they're not going to, that doesn't sound appealing to them. So they're not going to end up as censors when they take the test, because the way they have to word those questions to try to draw that line, SPs and SJs have a different word appeal in terms of those kind of questions. So you're faced with either you have to make them sort of half and half, so some appeal to SPs and some appeal to SJs, or you have to come up with a better way of determining that. To me, it might be better to have a test that established, sensor versus intuitive first, and then once it had made that, it would eliminate the other questions and focus on, okay, now that we've determined you're a sensing preference type, now let's determine whether you're a perceiver or judger from there,
So what you could do is, I would call that a dynamic test, where the questions that the answers you've given affect the questions that you get asked next. Right. Just like real life, you'd be dynamic. Right. If I was designing a test, I would ask questions to try and get towards someone's best fit temperament, and then the question would be about deciding.
That's why I've done with like periods of time where I did it with like people I worked with and stuff like that, where I would give that temperament assessment first, and then once we had determined that, then I could ask the right questions to narrow down the individual type from there. As opposed to, and there have been people that I just gave the step 1 MBTI to, to see what they came up with on that. And most of the time, I think it still comes up with the right type. But, sometimes there's kind of borderline people and then kind of have to figure out a different way. So I think Ben falls into that category because of that, the way that he views the PJ things, he answers in a way that's why I call him wannabe J, because his preference in his mind is to be a thing that ends up J on the test, even if his behavior in practice doesn't necessarily match that.
Yeah. Right. Danny, could you say a bit more about that? Oh yeah. So we got, somebody says here, yes, that's an interesting point. There needs to be more practical studies. And I think one of the problems is that Kersey sort of coming towards his academic career, wasn't he, when his books became successful? I mean, if it had been a bit earlier on, he could maybe have organized research in this to sort of test this through. Maybe they've got a lot of the Kersey group probably has got a lot of internal research about how things have gone in with organizations.
Yeah, I'm curious about there's some kind of organization that I don't even know what it stands for, but it's OKA on YouTube. They have a channel on there, and they obviously do some sort of seminars where they talk about Myers-Briggs as well as a few other, I think, personality typing systems. And I don't know what kind of studies and all they've done. I know that they obviously travel and do various workshops and things like that. But I don't know the details of any of that, because the stuff they post on YouTube is usually sort of excerpts of things, so it doesn't really give you the whole picture of what it is they're doing. So I don't know the details of it, but I know that there's a guy in I think it's Rutledge is his name, but I may be mixing up because there's a couple of different people. But the one that I've seen, I'm sure I linked it to you before, Ben. The video that I really like, where it talks about how perceivers and judgers like approach a problem or something like that. It's about a 10-minute video where he goes into basically the difference of, he uses a board that he writes on and stuff about, like, here's this, you got to be at this meeting at 3:00, and then sometime between now and then you have to clean the closet or something. And he talks about how the difference between the J and the P as far as how they go through the day or whatever. It's a pretty funny video and pretty spot on in terms of
getting towards somebody's preference rather than what they do, because it's like a lot of peers do the J thing because they have to. In order to
and he covers that briefly in there, is that because the funny part is he says they both got to the same destination, they both got the job done. So he said, is the closet in the J version any cleaner than the one in the P version? And then he stops for a second and he says, right now the J's in the room are going, of course it is. So, he shows the diagram, and he says, right now there are people, the J's in the room aren't comfortable with this diagram being in the room with us.
Wow.
So anyway, it's a pretty funny video, but.
All right.
So I wish there was more. I knew more about that stuff, and there was more available of that, because I think that's something that really does delve into a lot of the practical, like how this really shows itself in real life. And it's really easy to understand. So I wish there was actually more of that.
One of the weird things about what it's weird. It's like the thing that can most prove that, sort of like, not so much prove as be convincing about Model G, is something that was hard for me to explain, because I was going off a Google Translate explanation, and he was organizing it not based on how it goes on in the mind, but based on how people do things in reality, with the assumption that because he was looking at the social mission block and the social adaptation block, and he was saying that through various experiments that Victor, I think it was these other people, had done, it's like it appeared to be a benefit ring of 4 types, and they appeared to be very good at getting particular work done. And so he was thinking, well, if it works like this with people, then why not arrange the model that way? Because the model is about trying to mentally organize the effect in society. So, excellent. Great. Thanks, Danny. Right. I'll put that on there. I'll just put that in my Google contacts before it disappears. Right then, I'll just... Right. Right, so one of the things, because people watching this might be familiar with Model G and why it's arranged 89046. 890. Right. In that we can say, like, I mean, obviously it's not arranged like that in the psyche, but we can say that, well, in the practical examples, Victor thinks that the lead function works with the creative function, and he gives the example of ENTJ. The way they operate, they've got that business logic, and they have that, and they see opportunities and go for them as the role of the entrepreneur. So they would say social mission, TENE, working together as a block, and then you've got that social adaptation block where they will switch to those functions to usually do some sort of task in society. And Dario has said in his book, 8 Keys of Self-Leadership, published in 2005, that extroverts have overall more comfort with their extroverted functions than their introverted ones, and then vice versa for the introverts. So one of the things I did recently is I looked at a few people's score on the keys to cognition, and I looked to see if there was a trend of, do the extroverts score higher on the extroverted functions than the introverted ones, and the introverts on the introverted ones than the extroverted ones. See if there was that predicted pattern there, and it seemed about half of them did. I don't know if there was more the case of. The thing is, and Dario realizes this, that the way he phrases the FI questions, it very much lines up with American values. So in other cultures, less would maybe those scores for FI on those questions wouldn't be as high when there's a culture of self-improvement, at least amongst the people involved in typology, who were the kind of people who would take the tests. And this is something that Carol Linden has mentioned, I believe, that the people who take these tests are not a representative distribution of the whole population. Because what are the environments in which people are, say, given the MBTI? Well, it's usually in business, not the self-employed person or the cleaner or the mechanic. They're not given the MBTI, or someone running their own business. So people have to look at those districts. I don't know why I got on that point. Why did I mention that? I can't remember now. Right. Talking about lead and auxiliary in Model G. Yes. Carl Jung was on the fence about that in Psychological Types, and I'm going to stick to that fact, that because later on he said that all the auxiliary, and like he gave avertness on it. So for instance, INTJ, NITE. Now he defines TE as practical thinking. I think he goes something like practical thinking forging ahead with sensor. And there he's describing TESX, ESTJ. Wait a minute. So it's going to be at the end of that chapter where he then talks about the auxiliary functions. I'm going to put this on screen because I bang on about this quite a bit. Right. So there. I'm glad my webcam's behaving itself. Right. So from these combinations, well-known pictures arise. The practical intellect, for instance, paired with sensations. So that's TE with sensing. So TESX. So he's already defined TE as the practical intellect. So he's already defined TE as the practical intellect. I'll say it twice. And then we've got here speculative intellect, speculative intellect breaking through with intuition. So that is TINX. Now, also, the way he's defined it here is what's in those sections earlier on in the chapter. So I know he's talking about TE because he defines it as practical and speculative for the other one. So, given he's already defined TE as practical intellect, when he then describes the NI-DOM, the NITX, he does not say introverted intuition with practical thinking. He doesn't put that. So we've got the pink one here. This one, I don't know which type this could be. Artistic intuition which selects and presents its images by means of a feeling judgment. That could be NIFX. That fits Sanna. It could also be NEFX. And then this one here, the philosophical intuition which, in league with a vigorous intellect, translates its vision into the sphere of comprehensible thought. There, he put vigorous intellect. He didn't put practical thinker. Now, if you were hardcore on dominant and auxiliary function, you would have to put that NITE. But he is sitting on the fence there, right? Specific about lead function, but not about the auxiliary function. So, and I think that based on his interactions with people as a therapist, he would have seen that creative function there. He would have seen, so for example, if he's, say, interviewing somebody who he might describe as an introverted feeling type with auxiliary intuition, and he's had that person as a client, he would notice introverted intuition stuff about that client. Or he would notice that the strongest shadow function, in my opinion. And that's why I think he's sitting on the fence there. Because he describes TE as the practical intellect, and he does not say that the NITX is intuition plus TE. All right. Now, later on, I think he got a little bit more that way. The person to talk to about that, the person to have on the channel is Shalina, because she's read all the young stuff on typology, and von Franz and Van der Hoop. All right, what we got here? Here's a question. I could suggest the function attitudes were underdeveloped in lower classes because of working culture being ritual and ensconced. Maybe. I mean, you do get these people who, and I think frequently they're ISTJs, where in the past, like they go to the grammar school, but they would go to the library a lot, and they became these sort of, and one of the things to detect with these people, with these sort of autodidacts, and I remember in this book about writing for the radio, is that if you wanted to write a character who was an autodidact, and so all their knowledge came from books rather than learning it at the university, is they would mispronounce things. And it sort of gave that as the hallmark of, say, the person who was involved in a trade union, who was self-educated a lot. They would mispronounce things. I sometimes come across that. So I remember on Parkinson, Mel Gibson talking about his father being somebody who read a lot. Yeah, there would be, I think my grandfather, both of them went to, certainly the maternal grandfather went to the library a lot. Right. Well, let's see what happens. Let's see. Right. Budget. Somebody sent me a message there. I think I'll wind up at 2 hours, unless Jeff's going to come back. I'm a bit tired, how late it is.
Yeah, you decided to have this pretty late.
Pardon?
You decided to have this pretty late.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's a tricky one there about the lower classes in quotation marks. That's a tricky thing, because I've got to remember to do his email. Right. Let's get the right. What was the thanks for, Danny? Was it something to do? Well, how are you describing lower class? Because in England, so for instance, somebody like David Beckham, who's got a load of money, would still pretty much be working class. Yet you can have somebody who is a plumber and owns a firm who can be a millionaire, right, and he'd be working class. That's the same example. But you can have somebody who goes to university from a middle class family, gets a non-marketable degree, and yet they are sort of working a minimum wage job, and yet in England they would still be considered middle class because of their background. So it's not, whereas I think in the United States, well, they more go on like white collar, blue collar, but there is still the thing with background, especially I think in the Northeast. Does he come from money? All that kind of stuff. Yeah. Well, that's tricky. Well, the thing is, the information metabolism of educated minds is a lot of people are miseducated, especially when it comes to. Right. Okay. But that's fine, because it's the language, Danny. It's like, I'm like that with objective personality. I'm like, what is going on? This does not fit. This is what it must be like for people watching my channels about watching this channel about Model G. It's like I get to. It must seem like the way objective personality seems to me, because it doesn't fit with what I know. I'm getting a bit set in my ways in that regard. Right then. So did we get up to 1,000 subscribers? Let's have a look. I have actually got one of them things that will go out. One of those. Yes, on air, reached 1,000 subscribers. So, who was the 1,000 subscriber? Was it you, Danny? Did you? I don't know. Did you subscribe within the last half an hour? I don't know if you subscribed before. Anyway, so right, so I will send that email off. Oh, I'm also on Twitter. I've got it written on there. Yeah, that's Ben INTP, and I might even be that on Instagram as well. I think so. Yeah. Anyway, so if you go to my About tab, I've got social media links. Many of them are Facebook pages, but there's also Reddit, Instagram, Twitter. Yeah. So I think I'll wind up now. Get the email sent. What we got there? I'm just gonna check. Right then. So the objective was achieved. We got 1,000 subscribers. Because I had a problem there before I released those Enneagram of ENTP, Enneagram of INTJ. For a week, I wasn't going anywhere with the subscribers, and it was going up and down. I think, what's going on here? Anyway, so thank you, Retro Gamer. Yes. Right. Right, I'm going to end the live stream now. Bye-bye, folks. It doesn't stop straight away. It's not stopping. Now, will it? Now, I remember we did this with Dario Nardi. It never actually